Good morning. We're going to start. As you know, we have also people online, so we can't be too late. So, good morning, everybody. Mabuhay. Welcome to day 2. So, yesterday, the subtitle of our conference was Global Trends in Digital Transformation. Today, the subtitle is Climate Action and Green Transition. So we're going to have a very interesting program for you today, not as packed and as long as yesterday, but you have a lot of great opportunities. So maybe just mentioning 2 features of today. We are going to have, after the first morning session, a long networking coffee. I will explain at the end of the session how that works, but it's a 1 hour or 50-minute approximately session where you can actually also meet people, make appointments, have these important conversations. Okay, I will tell you how and where. We also do the check-in at the end of the first session. Some people were asking, how do I check in? Maybe you're worried you don't get a coffee if you're not checked in. That's not the case, but we do a joint check-in at the end of the morning session, okay? So last but not least, remember, if you want to ask questions, we are interested in your questions, even we can only tackle a few. That's also for our online participants. Please make use of the app and ask questions. If possible, use your name. So without further ado, we are going to start traditionally in our skills forum, always with a keynote every day. And this time I got help to introduce our keynote speaker, who is hopefully already online. So I hand over again, and many of you who attended our networking reception yesterday already met him. Please welcome one more time the Director General and Group Chief of the Sectors Group at the ADB, Mr. Ramesh Subramaniam.
Good morning, all of you. Very, very nice to see you. Yesterday, I heard that after 7 p.m., the cultural gathering became even more lively. So we had presentations by Nepal, India, Pakistan, many other countries. So very, very happy to see that. My job is super simple for this session, which is to introduce a person whom I have come to deeply respect and professionally admire. I think she's already connected. Kelly Sims Gallagher, who's the Dean ad interim and Professor of Energy and Environmental Policy at the Fletcher School, Tufts University in Boston, Massachusetts in the US. Kelly directs the Climate Policy Lab and the Center for International Environment and Resource Policy at Fletcher School. She served in the President Obama administration as a senior policy advisor in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy and a senior China advisor in the Special Envoy for Climate Change Office in the US State Department. Many of us from ADB, a group of about 50 people, went recently and spent a week at Fletcher's. One of the most memorable programs that we've had, many of us participate in various things. This happened very, very recently, just a month back, I think in September. That was in the context of the new operating model and the climate change shift that ADB has been adopting for the past, actually, since 2018, which will become even more important in the new operating model. And to guide us in that journey, we went to Fletcher's. And Kelly was one of the key people involved in that program. Just to continue, by the way, if I start, if I need to complete the entire bio, it's going to take a long time, but I do want to mention a couple of things. In addition to what I said, Kelly is also a member of the board of the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard University. And she is also a scholar at the Carnegie Endowment. And she serves on the board of the Energy Foundation of the People's Republic of China. And broadly, she focuses on energy and climate policy in both the US and in the People's Republic of China. So she'll be talking to us today on shaping climate resilient education systems. And please do, as she is speaking, you can Google. She's published extensively, lots of publications that you can look at. But one particular paper I would strongly recommend, the coming, or a publication rather, the coming carbon tsunami, how developing countries need a new growth model before it is too late. And with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce and to welcome Kelly to give a keynote address. Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you so much also for staying late in the evening and joining us.
Thank you, Ramesh. It's so good to see you, even though I'm so far away. And thank you for that generous introduction. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this morning. It's evening, my time, and I wish I could be there in person. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if I can be given permission to do so. Okay. Well, thank you. Yes, as Ramesh mentioned, my task is to talk about how to shape climate resilient education systems. And it's a great pleasure to talk about this. It's a cause near and dear to my heart as a professor and someone who has spent most of my career in education. And I can't think of a more important topic really for us to discuss. Let me begin by talking about why we need climate education. I think the answer is quite simple, that climate literacy is essential for understanding the world we live in today and anticipating future conditions. And as we think about how to anticipate future conditions, there are two dimensions to that I want to talk about. The first is an understanding of climate risks. And then the second, which I will come to after, is understanding of opportunities in the green transition.
Professor Gallagher, can you enlarge your screen? We see your pre-mode.
Oh dear. Okay, let me. Is that working better?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So here I'm going to just show you as I'm talking a video, and this shows you temperature change starting from the Industrial Revolution and coming up until today. The more yellow and orange and red you see, the more warming there is. And I show you this, it's going to bring us all the way to the present summer, the summer we just finished. And according to NASA, the months of June, July, and August were warmer than any other summer on record. And here you can see summer 2023. And maybe this doesn't surprise you because we all lived through this summer and we remember just how warm it was. The average was 2.1 degrees Fahrenheit or 1.2 degrees Celsius warmer than the average summer between 1951 and 1980. So this is quite stark. It means we are already approaching a 1.5 degree warming, which of course we have collectively as a world pledged to try to avoid in the Paris Agreement. And I think it's coming much more quickly than scientists anticipated. Of course, it could be an anomalous year, but I think it gives us a sense of the risks in front of us because we saw as this exceptional heat swept most of the world, very deadly wildfires in Canada, Hawaii, searing heat waves in South America, Japan, Europe, and the United States, and very likely contributing to severe rainfall in Italy, Greece, and Central Europe. So we got a taste of what a 1.5 degree world might look like. And as a result of the very intense warming that we've been experiencing, I'm just going to give you two other examples of the risks due to my limited time, but I wanted to use this one because we see northern hemisphere sea ice is declining very rapidly. And, if the current trend continues within a decade or two, we will have no more sea ice in the northern hemisphere. Why does this matter as a climate risk? Well, for one thing, the sea ice in the northern hemisphere reflects sunlight entering the atmosphere and provides a kind of albedo effect. And the more dark ocean we have and dark land, the more warming we will experience, which will accelerate and cause essentially a feedback loop of warming. And that, of course, is really quite dangerous. And then the third risk I wanted to mention is the risk of sea level rise. And this graphic shows you sea level changes from 1993 to 2021. The darker the blue in this graphic, the more sea level rise there has been. So you can see, for example, off the coast of Northeast Asia, we see some very dark dark blue colors, which indicates a pretty substantial rise in sea levels of 20 centimeters. And this, of course, is very dangerous, especially in places where there's land subsidence, because the net effect can be even higher. And it puts people directly at risk due to inundation, perhaps affecting croplands, fresh water supply, and so forth. But it also creates additional risk due to storm surges during tropical cyclones and other extreme weather events. So these are just three significant risks that we need to understand. These are likely to become even more risky in the decades and years ahead. And so as we think about the young people that we educate today, in their lifetimes, they are going to be experiencing substantially more climatic change than we as adults have already experienced. And they need to understand the world they're walking into. However, I don't want to be completely alarmist, and I want to talk about the green economy opportunities as well. And I'm going to use an example from the United States because I think it's a very recent example, and we are accumulating some interesting data already about the kind of economic opportunity that a green transition can create. So as I'm sure many of you know, the Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law in August 2022. It was part of a package of three major new laws, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the CHIPS and Science Act. It's almost entirely supply-side investments. It's basically extending incentives to private industry. There's very few sticks. It's all carrots, no sticks. And it's largely using a fiscal policy approach, tax incentives, loan guarantees, and even grants. It's very large, much larger than most countries would be able to afford to do. So I'm not trying to indicate that this is possible at the same scale in many countries in Asia and the Pacific. But still, it's interesting to see what has happened as a result of this act now that we're a year into it. For one thing, we're seeing that it has really leveraged private sector investments. So in the last 12 months, 110 billion in new corporate investment has taken place in the United States in manufacturing. And you can see the blue color is batteries. So interestingly, most of this new corporate investment is in batteries. But also you can see significant investments in zero emission vehicles and in solar. So this is a lot of new manufacturing in the United States. And interestingly, we are also seeing, and this was largely unanticipated, $100 billion in household and business clean energy or clean vehicle purchases. So there seems to be some sort of virtuous cycle that's unfolding, where the fact that it's known that the government is incentivizing these technologies is spurring people to make purchases. And of course, this is creating a lot of jobs. So the estimated jobs impact in the first 12 months is that 170,000 new clean energy jobs were created. You can see where they are created by type: solar, wind, electric vehicles, clean tech, hydrogen, batteries, and grids. And hopefully you can see, while you may not be familiar with all of the different states, the point of this graph is to show that there has been job creation in almost every single US state in the United States, except I think 3. And so this is quite notable because I think it is going to be creating widespread economic opportunity. And then finally, foreign direct investment in US manufacturing doubled last year from pre-pandemic levels. And I think it's largely attributed to both the clean energy and semiconductor investments, both of which were triggered by the trio of laws. So I use these examples from the United States to just illustrate how there could be a lot of opportunity in the green energy transition. And we need to be educating students who are ready and well-trained and skilled to enter these green industries. Now I want to turn to a short discussion of what we've done in my own school, because I thought this might be just an interesting case study for you to think about. The Fletcher School is the oldest graduate-only school of global affairs in the United States. We're celebrating our 90th anniversary this year. And the school has evolved a lot over the years. It was originally founded as the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. And while we still do both of those things, we've added many other fields of study to the school. And in 1992, the same year as the Earth Summit in Rio, we established a new interdisciplinary field of study, an environment and resource policy, and a research center with the same name. When I joined the Fletcher School in 2009, I developed our very first course on climate change law and policy. And then in 2015, the same year the Paris Agreement was established, we founded the Climate Policy Lab. And since then, we've developed new courses on climate and migration, and even more recently, a new course on climate and security. And you know, our particular school is focused on training people in global affairs and global business. So these are, you know, the sorts of classes that a school like that should be offering. And that'll be different depending on the type of school. Our mission in the Climate Policy Lab, which I founded and still direct, is to determine which climate policies work, which don't, and why. And we strive to build sustainable prosperity in a changing global environment through rigorous, policy-relevant, interdisciplinary research, and by training the next generation of national and global leaders. We strive to serve as a global intellectual hub for comparative climate policy analysis and learning, to provide independent, objective, and actionable policy analysis for governments considering new or reformed climate policies. And we conduct training, apprenticeships, and capacity building. And I'll give you a couple of examples. This is a picture of our master's degree students who are in this picture trying to do a mock simulation of the global climate negotiations, where we've introduced them to the issues that are being covered in the climate negotiations, but also how to do the negotiation. And here they're negotiating the loss and damage fund. So in building the future workforce in these domains, we are very proud to have produced new faculty members, creating a global network of people who are working on these topics. And I'll give you another picture here. We have trained climate negotiators, clean tech entrepreneurs, government officials, NGO leaders, climate philanthropists, and other teachers and professors. And we've been also working on doing a climate policy summer academy where we bring professionals from government and think tanks and universities around the world together each June. In the realm of capacity building, here's just a few examples of different workshops that we've done over the years in different locations, ranging from the Pacific Islands to India, to China and Haiti, and the LDC group. In serving as an intellectual hub, we try to do different conferences and meetings, research pavilions, and we have many research partnerships in strategic countries. And of course, we try as a university to produce top quality research, but not to just stop there and put the studies, on the doorstep, but then to take the next step and do policy engagement, working with governments in different countries. These are our current research themes. We focus on climate policy performance, climate finance, low carbon growth and socioeconomic transitions, resilient development and adaptation, and clean energy innovation. And let me just conclude by talking about how ADB could focus its investments in education. And I have, 3 main points. This sort of education work needs to be done at all levels, whether it's kindergarten to 12th grade, as we say in the United States, but also including undergraduate and graduate university study. It should be all disciplines. A multidisciplinary approach is essential. We need people who are literate in science and who can do the technological work and the engineering. But not just that. The social sciences, I think, are very important, especially for understanding the just transition and how to make vulnerable populations protected and resilient to climate change. And finally, all countries. No country is immune from climate risk, and all countries can benefit from a green economy once they determine their own comparative advantage. And with that, I thank you for your attention and look forward to our discussion and your questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Gallagher, for setting the scene for today. We are going straight into our only plenary session this morning, and we want to have a deep dive on the question about the role of climate education in steering a green and a just transition. And I have the pleasure to invite our moderators and our panelists to come on stage, please. And Professor Gallagher will also join us virtually. So we have 3 colleagues on stage and 2 colleagues joining virtually. And I have the pleasure to introduce you to your moderator. He is a Senior Director for Climate Change, Resilience and Environment Cluster at the Climate Change and Sustainable Development Department here at the ADB, but he's no stranger to climate change. He was a focal point for many climate topics here at the ADB. He's also an expert on energy, so I'm sure we are in good hands. Please welcome our moderator, Toru Kubo.
Thank you very much, Jost. Is this working? Can people hear? Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Thanks again for coming to Manila. For many of you, I hope you had a great day 1. So this is start of day 2. Thanks to our keynote speaker, Kelly. Our DG Ramesh mentioned about the program we had about 6 weeks ago. I was one of the participants in that, and we learned so much from Kelly and her team. They have really an excellent super team that can cover the interdisciplinary aspects that Kelly just talked about. So she highlighted the risks of climate change, but also the opportunities. And this education, this group and the whole community can really drive that opportunity side, right? So very exciting, and thanks for the organizers for inviting me to kick this off and set the stage for the rest of the day. So this session, there are a couple of objectives. And number one, so we're going to talk about climate education, climate smart education. So what is that? Because there are many different interpretations, and people are they're practitioners, and you have a fantastic panel who can talk about it. What are the key drivers of the need for climate education, climate smart education? You heard from Kelly about the risks of climate change, of course, and the opportunities, but what are the other drivers that are coming up? And now we don't really need to start from scratch. You know, that's the good news, right? Because we all have good foundations. So what is the best approach to really transforming that, sort of greening and making the education system sort of climate, smart compatible for resilience and low carbon transition? Also, are there innovative approaches, sort of new attempts that really can make a step change in this area? And finally, we want to identify priorities, because you have to start from somewhere. So what are the priorities to chart that path to making our education system smarter on climate and greener? Now, in this context, I'm really glad Kelly mentioned about just transition, because education is an enabler for a just transition for a low carbon and resilient society. It needs to be a whole of society approach, and education is really the key intervention that can unlock the shift. So with that, we're going to have 2 rounds of panel discussions. Each panel member will have 4 minutes. I'm sorry, there's a lot to talk about, but if you can keep it very short. So we have a very diverse and powerful panel. We have Ms. Rika Yorozu. She's online. So she's the head of the executive office and regional program at regional program coordinator at UNESCO. You can see there, and of the Asia Pacific Regional Bureau for Education. So she has been running programs for the UN and UNESCO. She is there on green education. We have Christina Kwok. She's a research director for Unbounded Associates. I love that name, Unbounded Associates, and the interdisciplinary nature of that. And she has recently, and you have long history of publications, but the most recent publications, we're going to dive into that very shortly. We have Associate Professor Dimple Quinn, and she's a Dean of the Learning and Teaching Faculty of Science and Engineering at Curtin University in Australia. So you have been developing, for example, in the energy field and energy skills needs. So we would love to hear about your experience there and lessons to share with this group. And we have Professor Wim van den Doel. He is the Dean of the Leiden Delft Erasmus University Alliance, which is really fantastic. So this is an innovation. And this is the need of having interdisciplinary approaches. How can you combine the strength of different faculties and provide that learning environment for students? So we would really look forward to hearing from him. Okay. So we will start from Ms. Rika. I hope you are able to hear us.
Yes.
Ms. Rika?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay. All right, great. So as all of us know, UNESCO is at the forefront of leading education globally. And if you can talk about the key drivers, one of the objectives of this session on climate education, and because you're forerunner, what are the challenges that you are seeing in this area together with opportunities? And if you have any immediate reactions to Professor Kelly's keynote, and if you can blend that in, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Toru-san. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, the volume is a bit low. So can we up the volume here, IT team? Yeah, okay. All right, please go ahead.
Yeah, so let me answer your questions by sharing what young people are asking about climate change education. Because prior to the UN Transforming Education Summit that was held in September 2022, UNESCO conducted a survey with young people. And 70% of those respondents said that they don't feel confident about climate change knowledge. They don't understand how to explain about the climate change. And yet in terms of how they want to learn, they mentioned they want to learn about solutions. They want to learn through action-oriented pedagogies. So yet we found out in 2021 study we conducted that only half of the national education policies and curriculum mention a word climate change. And imagine that while 95% of the teachers in primary and secondary schools believe that the teaching about climate change is important, only 20% of them feel that they can explain well how to take action on climate change. Also, another angle is that last year, together with the UNU, we looked specifically at Asia's challenge on addressing climate change, displacement, and right to education. We looked at this because 80% of the climate change population are in Asia. And so there's a large number of children affected by climate displacement, much more so than those refugees due to conflicts and war. So one of the key recommendations from this is that the education sector should be included in the national climate adaptation plans and task force so that the schools are ready for this climate-related disasters. And because I really think that when the climate disaster strikes, children from the low-income families, the migrants, and the ethnic minority children in this region are the ones that are the most often losing access to schooling when the climate disaster strikes. So in order to address this kind of challenges, UN Family is working with the member states on competency-based education, shifting the focus from what learners are expected to know to what learners are expected to do, to take actions based on the assessment of the situations that is happening to them. Yet the world requires a powerful multi-stakeholder alliance, bringing together the governments and wide range of stakeholders like those that are present in this forum today and backed by a strong commitment and the funding. That's why a global initiative, Greening Education Partnership, was launched to deliver a strong, coordinated, and comprehensive collaboration on climate change education, together with the collective accountability. So the partnership is bringing together the governments committed to climate change education and a broad range of partners, institutions that have the expertise in the social, economical, cultural, and environmental facets of climate crisis. As of last month, 80 member states and over 1,100 organizations have joined these partnerships. They are participating in one or more of the GEP working groups. The 4 pillars of the Greening Education Partnership, I hope I can share more about in the next question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was fantastic. And those were powerful numbers that you shared with us and really bringing out the clear need to strengthen the systems. And yes, we would like to go more into the Green Education Partnership later in the second round. So let's go to Christina. So in your research, we talked about briefly the new green learning agenda. So for post-secondary education, you really make the case for so just transition, and you frame the climate crisis as a technical and adaptive challenge. I'm very curious about this because Kelly, when we went to Boston, she and her faculty colleague Alnur talked about this massive adaptive challenge. Can you talk about that? What you mean by technical adaptive challenge, and what are the implications for how we should teach education? And if you can also sort of touch on that just transition aspect. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the ADB for having me here. It's a pleasure to be able to talk about an issue that's very, very dear to my heart with you all today. So typically when I talk to audiences about the climate crisis in education, I like to start off by saying, you know, how we frame the climate crisis defines our climate solutions. So if we frame the climate crisis as a technical challenge, which we know it is, Professor Gallagher just mentioned it, you know, human activities are causing global temperatures to rise, it's causing haywire to our climate systems or our weather systems, and so on, right? We understand the technical challenge there. Well, when we define the climate crisis as a technical challenge, it defines our educational solutions to ones where we're trying to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions. We're trying to help spur on the economic green transitions, which means that our education systems are really focused then on creating a green workforce. You know, what are the technical skills that are required in energy and transportation and manufacturing and agriculture and so on? Those are very much valid, very much needed. But when we begin to think about the climate crisis as not just a technical challenge, but also a sociological one, an adaptive challenge, this requires a change in mindsets, a change in values, a change in beliefs, a change in really how we think, how we be, how we do in this planet with each other and with our natural resources around us. So when we think about it that way, we can begin to think about the adaptive challenge in what I like to say two particular ways. We can think about it, one, as a result of our unsustainable individual behaviors, right? So our consumption patterns, our energy usage, our lifestyle choices, and so on. And then we begin to say, okay, well, if the root of the problem is our individual behaviors, then education's solution then is to help teach us about the knowledge, you know, the skills and the awareness about how we can live greener, more sustainable lifestyles, right? So critical thinking about what, you know, where do our plastic water bottles come from? Where does it go when we're done with it? Communication, problem solving skills, and so on. But the sociological challenge of climate change isn't just about individual behaviors. It's about our unjust human systems. It's about how the inequities that are structured along gender lines, racial lines, geographic lines, structured by histories of colonialism and imperialism, extractive capitalism, all of this, then we begin to see that the role of education is not just about individual behaviors, but it's about the transformative skills that are required to really get at deep systems change. So this is things like collective action, coalition building, political advocacy, self-efficacy around, you know, engaging in issues of unequal relations of power. So when we think about that, then we begin to say, okay, well, if we're defining climate change too narrowly, then our education solutions become too narrow. And if our education solutions are too narrow, then the range of skills that we're targeting become too narrow. So the way I like to think about this, especially in the context of how we, you know, how do we educate in the era of climate change? We really need to begin to think about a broader breadth of green skills. And this includes not only the technical skills that are needed to propel our renewable energy systems and clean energy transitions and so on, but we also need to focus on the generic skills, thinking about communication, problem solving, critical thinking, in orientation to solving sustainability challenges. But most critically are the transformative skills, the inner skills, the interpersonal skills, the skills that are really tackling or enable us to then tackle deep systems change. And so from there, I can go on and on about this, but you know, we have design elements for thinking about how educators can actually incorporate this into their teaching, but I can go into that a little bit later. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Christina. That was very powerful, very convincing. I actually have an engineering background, but then my professor at my graduate study was an anthropologist, and he always talked about human behavior, right? You can actually address a lot, and that was sort of the entry into the interdisciplinary. But what you said is so true, and we'll dive more into just transition, right? Whole of society approach, later. Okay, well, Associate Professor Quinn, Dimple Quinn. So when we move to you, so you've been really developing this program in the energy space, and that's in the science and engineering at Curtin University, and you started a new curricula and also qualifications, right? So can you talk a little bit about that and what's the driving that need, which several speakers talked about? And now that you've gone through it, what does climate education mean to your faculty now? Are you getting that feedback from colleagues? Thank you.
Thanks for that. Can you hear me? So thank you for that question. And I'm building on what Christina said. For Curtin University, the drivers for creating different courses and curricula have actually been driven not just from one sector. It's by actually understanding what the different sectors need from us. So from a government perspective, it is about the clean energy workforce into the next few decades. What does that look like? This year, the federal government conducted a roundtable with universities, and I represented Curtin on that roundtable, exploring how we're actually going to prepare the next workforce, the next generation for jobs that don't exist. So that is the university's, challenge that we are preparing to meet. And as part of that, we created a 4-year undergraduate energy engineering degree, which is really a very innovative one. It's one of a kind. And we created that with the specific purpose of preparing fully qualified graduates to be able to work in the engineering and related areas, but also thinking about what do we need for current oil and gas workers? What do we need for the current industry of chemical engineers or electrical engineers or tradespeople? So that looks very different. So we're looking at short courses, micro-credentials, MOOCs, professional development or executive education opportunities, which is very important to reskill or to upskill the current workforce to be able to work in those related areas. So those are the real drivers, but also identifying that the public, so the pipeline of students come in with a mindset. And I created a brand new course, which is now taught across multiple global campuses, which really challenges and addresses the critical thinking aspects that Christina talked about. What does it mean to actually electrify a state? Is all electricity equal? Yes or no? The answer is no. Or, solar. What does it mean to replace everything with solar panels? Is that sustainable? What about the critical minerals involved in a dead solar panel? It's really hard to extract that, harder than it is to extract it from the ground, for example. So there is that ambiguity about what it means to green everything, right? And preparing students to critically evaluate that on the basis of a circular economy and the principles of net zero, and addressing UN SDGs. For example, we know the industry sector, they need to understand how to make their transportation sustainable, because that's a huge energy price we pay. Or recover waste heat from their processes. So what does that mean to them? And how do we actually look at it from a very systems thinking perspective? So that's really what we're trying to target. And we have a multifaceted approach to do that. I have 15 seconds left. But really it is about understanding what the different, so public policy, talking to people across sectors, and having a whole of university perspective, I think is very important. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, and that linked indeed very well with what Christina talked about. I wish I had your course when I was in an engineering school. So we'll go to Professor Wim van den Dol. This is really an innovation. I'm really excited you can share this with us. But you put together an alliance. You're the dean of the alliance between 3 universities. So if you can talk about that, sort of what led to that, and of course in the context of these emerging challenges, polycrisis, but today especially for the climate smart education.
Yes, thank you very much. Great to be here. I think I can build on what has already been said, because I think we all agree on this necessity to have interdisciplinary approaches and holistic approaches, which was also discussed yesterday. The problem, of course, is that our universities sometimes are not structured well for today's challenges. So the universities of today are not well fit for the climate crisis we all face, because we all have disciplinary faculties, disciplinary departments, and so on. And universities are quite difficult to change. So you are all policymakers in this audience, I think, how to make your universities change. That's a very difficult question, I think. Somebody once said to change, it's rather difficult to change university. It's like moving a graveyard. You don't get much help from inside. And so they don't help you. So this is the challenge, actually. So you have universities which are structured in a certain way, which are conservative because there are all vested interests. And then we decided actually to face up to this question and have this alliance of a comprehensive university, of an engineering school, and of a school of economics and business. So there's Rotterdam Business, Engineering Schools Delft, the comprehensive university is Leiden. Really to set up an alliance and to create new programs for students and for researchers to work on the challenging issues of today. How do we do it? Well, we don't build a new faculty of climate policy or climate engineering and policy, because that's a very difficult thing to do. And students still have to be taught as an engineer or as a lawyer or as et cetera. But you try to bring them together in centers to bring the people who really are looking forward to work together in this interdisciplinary way, to bring them together, give them some money so they can run all kinds of programs like the Fletcher School, like the example of the Fletcher School. So that's what you're doing in the research area. And in education, you bring students together in new, smaller programs. So in the bachelor programs, we do that with minors. So there's 1 semester of the 6 semesters of the bachelor program that you have these interdisciplinary topics you can challenge with a interdisciplinary group of students, because that's very important in minors or in thesis labs in the master's programs. So bring them together without actually changing the curricula as such, but bring them together in certain parts of their student life. Is that easy? No, it's not easy. So you have to accept this takes time. First of all, the researchers have to learn each other's language. An anthropologist talks different than an engineer. So you need time to get to understand each other. So so please use your time. And it's also that's also true for the students. And student from an engineering school is a different type of person as a lawyer or a political science person. But bring them together, give them time to understand each other, and give them a topic to work together, to work on that together. And then it works. Then you see really that it changes students' perspectives, and it really also changes the perspective of the researchers.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing that. And we'll dive into the difficulties, because it is a hard process. And congratulations to you for leading that, bringing people together and setting it up and running the alliance. Okay, so that covered a lot in our first round, and I thank the panelists for sticking to your time allocation. There's a big timer here, by the way. It's counting down, so that helps. So we're going to go to the second round, and we'll deep dive, right? A little bit with the time that we have. So we'll go back to Ms. Rika Yorozu. I hope you're there, connected. So you talked about the Greening Education Partnership that is really a UN initiative, and of course UNESCO being a big pillar of that. And you touched on the key pillars of that program, GEP. So can you describe that a little bit more? And importantly, how does UNESCO support its members along those pillars?
Okay, thank you, Toru-san. So the Greening Education Partnership is coordinated by UNESCO, which has been promoting the education for sustainable development, which Christine and Kelly refer to as questioning the power relations through education. And as a GEP, as a partnership, it has an advisory group and the 4 working groups have been set up to implement the 4 pillars of the Greening Education Partnership. The first pillar is on greening schools. It's coordinated by the Foundation for Environmental Education, the World Food Program, and Aga Khan Foundation. It's developing guidelines, whole school approach to greening schools, from making climate-ready school facilities and operations, greening teachers, teaching, learning facilities, and it's really having a goal to have at least 50% of the schools, the colleges and universities, to practice green schools by 2030. So I hope that more universities would follow the examples of the Fletcher School and the cases in Netherlands in Asia region. The second pillar is on the greening curriculum. It's coordinated by Dubai Cares, the Office for Climate Change Education, and International Renewable Energy Agencies. Its main area is working on greening curriculums so that the relevance and quality of learning content and pedagogy is climate change education. So you might be wondering why Renewable Energy Agency is interested in this sub-working group. It's precisely so that the green skills training, such as those mentioned by Kelly, the renewable energy skills, are integrated into the curriculums in worldwide. The green skills training, the goal is for more curriculum and teaching and learning practices from pre-primary to tertiary education and from academic to TVET to really have a stronger greening education curriculum. The third pillar is on greening teacher training and education systems capacity to support the other 3 pillars on greening schools, greening curriculum, and greening communities. This is led by UNICEF, Education International. It's an important group of teacher unions and a global partnership for education. So this is focused on strengthening the education systems and training teachers and policymakers. The last pillar is on greening communities. This is led by UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, and the World Organization of the Scout Movement. It's aiming to expand the greening learning opportunities throughout life, outside of the school settings. And through learning cities and community-based learning centers, the GP aims to support schools with school to work transition as well. I just want to close that for everybody on the floor. One email address to remember to contact the Greening Education Partnership is gep@unesco.org. And I hope that more members will be joining so that the UNESCO can support the member states together with the partners of this Greening Education Partnerships. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yorozu-san, on that. It's fantastic, the audience, including here in person and virtual. They're getting these ideas from the panel, and you have this established program that can provide support and knowledge to the members on those 4 pillars. I really love how you extend to the 4th pillar, which is outside the classroom, and that transition into the skills and on the actual sort of community support that also enhances the classroom experience as well. So thank you very much for sharing that. So we'll go back to Christina. And if we can continue on the earlier point, but if you could dive into just transition, because this is such an important theme and need, especially in the developing country context. How can education be the key enabler driver for just transition?
Yeah, this is a really critical piece and some work that my colleagues and I have recently completed around post-secondary institutions and just transitions. So with the focus on just transitions, we really have an unprecedented opportunity to ensure that our transitions from a brown economy to a green economy leaves no one behind. So the professor here had already mentioned, we need to be concerned about those whose lives and livelihoods will be displaced or will be made obsolete by green transitions. And so typically those are occupations in the oil and gas sector, the transportation, construction, and so on. These also happen to be fields that are predominated by men and typically have benefited male workers in most societies. But critically important too, when we think about just transitions, is that this transition from brown to green economies needs to also include and center those individuals who have already been on the margins of a brown economy. So this includes women, indigenous people, economically marginalized populations, displaced people, people with disabilities, and so on. This group of individuals tends to already lack the opportunity to gain access to skills and to education and training opportunities in the first place. So, and they also, as I mentioned before, tend to mean that we're focusing on girls and women, we're focusing on other populations. And so why is it important to think about these two groups? It's because then if we're only focusing on sort of the primary sectors that are greening, majority of our investments are going to go to male-dominated sectors, therefore benefiting mostly male students and the male workforce. So here, I want to, then what do we need to do then to address just transition and address these gaps in the economy and with green jobs? Well, the primary thing that we need to be focusing on is how do we close what we call green learning opportunity gaps? Because green learning opportunity gaps are what is structuring the green skills gaps that we see across demographic groups. And so I want to give you an example from the US context. This is where some of our work is really focused on, because I think it really kind of highlights the tangible nature of just how far away a just transition is if we don't focus on closing these green learning opportunity gaps. So we looked at the fastest growing green jobs in the United States, and Professor Gallagher had already showed that map of the US and showed, the 170,000 jobs that have been created in the first year of the Inflation Reduction Act. Well, that's really great. But when we look at this from a disaggregated view and look at it from the fastest growing jobs, those jobs are predominated by white men. 75% are male, or 75% of the workers in the fastest growing green jobs are men, and 80% are white. And surprisingly, over 60% of the fastest growing green jobs require a bachelor's degree. So all of this discourse around how the green economy and the green transition will open up a whole bunch of new jobs for those who are lower skilled and have less opportunity and access to green skills training opportunities. It's a far cry, at least at the present moment in the US context. So what are our opportunities to change this? Well, the sad part is that because of existing inequities in access to education and training, the opportunities to get underrepresented groups into the pipeline to those green jobs is extremely low. So if we're not paying attention to closing these green learning opportunity gaps, we're not going to have the opportunity to achieve a just transition that includes these underrepresented populations. The challenge, especially for post-secondary institutions, is then to think, well, how do we do that? Where do we need to focus our energies? Where do we focus our attention? In the long history of post-secondary education, we have done a very poor job in aligning our educational programming with industry demands. And I think one of the key pieces that our previous speaker just spoke about was the issue of turning to communities. How do we begin to incorporate community needs, community demands, community just transition needs into the ways we think about our education and training opportunities? And I'm over my timer. So I'm going to stop here. If there's more time, if there's more questions, we can go into that.
Thank you so much, and great job in 4 minutes. And that's again very powerful. As we all know, climate change really impacts the most vulnerable, and climate change is not gender neutral. There's so many impacts, and it's quite well studied. And our gender team actually is really has expertise. But for example, heat stress. It has particular impact on women. And you mentioned about involving inclusive approach to just transition and moving societies towards low carbon and resilient growth. And women can be big drivers of change, so the agents of change, right? So how can we really empower, bring that into the society and equip them? So yeah, thank you very much for sharing that. Okay, so we'll go. Actually, we have quite a common thread here, and we'll go to Associate Professor Temple Quinn. So if you can talk about sort of your curriculum and the steps towards making this institutional change. Like if the audience really wants to do what you've gone through, how do they really start, right? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So I think it's driven by the top, right? It starts with the government, but also the university leadership or educational institution leadership. So the government has a part to play. We have a new universities accord coming in nationally in Australia, which essentially tells us universities, and addressing what Christina's point was, we need to increase the pipeline to minority groups. So those who naturally wouldn't access education, we need to find ways to help them through, and we need to find ways to support them and document it. So federally, that is the onus is on the universities to abide by that. But on a university level, we look at things like, driven by the Deputy Vice Chancellor academic, embedding the UN SDGs into the curriculum. So there's a documented approach. The Dean's Learning and Teaching are held accountable for our individual working groups in our areas, and we actually consult widely in order to develop the curricula that addresses specific UN SDGs, right? Same with Indigenous populations and minority groups. So we really have the accountability to be able to say, well, when we're asked, report on this, how you're doing this is what we need to do. But speaking to Professor Wim's point on creating minors, so the way the university curricula are structured, we actually have a way to provide minors or specializations across faculties, which helps that multidisciplinary approach that we need, because we know this is not just about science, but it's about public policy, it's about the social licensing aspects, and moving towards a just transition and creating specific curricula. We need to help people make meaning out of what we teach them. Because education is not about teaching, it's about how it's learned. And the making meaning aspect looks different to someone who is living a hand-to-mouth existence with coal as their only fuel source, compared to someone in a very rich economy who is relying on, solar power, for example. So looking at what that meaning is and how do we embed that and drive that change, that's what we've been, that's our approach, if you like. So in moving towards that, we actually have a government funding about $100 million to, over the next couple of years, for us to work together with industry in order to have that industry input and students and staff moving seamlessly between academia and industry to be able to co-develop curricula to address these sorts of issues. So those things are in the domain of public policy, and federal and government decision making. So I think, to summarize, it's really about the scientists who have the science being heard and speaking to the relevant decision-making people or panels to be able to advocate for real and sustainable change. Thank you.
Thank you. Right on the dot. 4 minutes. I'm really impressed. So I guess it is a chicken and egg process. You need that sort of policy driver, but you also advise the government and policy making. So there's that initiative and the body of critical knowledge. You advise and you work with the government, and then the government sets a policy and drives the whole sort of academic field in the country, and you work with industry. So, and I'm really glad that Professor Women, you mentioned about minors, because actually, here, and I'm sure many of you, but here we go through hundreds of CVs for job applications, right, for staff or consultancy. And we look at minors because a major is their core sort of vertical discipline. And the minor often provides that horizontal, the interlinkages, and you need that skill going forward. So thank you for bringing that up. So we'll go to Professor Van den Doyle and going back to the Alliance, and the same question, sort of, how really for this audience, what can you share in terms of starting the interdepartmental, but also inter-college and the practical steps that you can take there? And if you can touch on business schools, because that's a critical sort of piece of education and skills, and they don't really have a culture on sort of climate smarts yet. So if you can touch on that, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think I fully agree that there should be some leadership, of course, from the top, from the government, and there's a chicken and egg problem, because who is starting the discussion. But at a certain moment, I think people start to implement changes in minors and also in interdisciplinary master programs, because that's I think another way of implementing this interdisciplinary mindset and approach. If you have a disciplinary bachelor program with a minor, then you can enter a interdisciplinary master's program, like we have the governance of sustainability. It's about environmental sciences and political science, and the people are meeting. So actually, we were quite happy about what we are doing. So we had minors, we had centers, we have master's programs. So we are all very happy. And suddenly, students started to take the initiative and occupied the offices of the president, because they thought, we are not going fast enough. We want to break full 100% all links with fossil industries. Of course, from the Netherlands, Shell is a rather big player in our economy. So if you demand a full break with fossil industries, that's a big demand, so to speak. So suddenly we were not happy with ourselves any longer. Of course, the president's first response is to get rid of those students out of his office. But of course, then you start discussing, what do you actually want? What actually are you missing in our curricula? And so you start discussing the future of education with your students. So I bring in the students here, and perhaps also the young researchers. And then in the business school, the young people at the business school said, we want to have non-fossil business as in education. So we don't want to have this old-fashioned business school. We want to change. So this pressure actually came from the students. And right now, at this moment, we are constructing, let's say, sustainable business. That's a working title. So it's sciences, it's environmental sciences, it's business. So a merger in a way of environmental sciences with business to set up an entirely new program. And so how come? Through the students. So this is my takeaway message in a way. Empower your students. Empower your young researchers if you want really to change your universities. Universities are conservative organizations because they are very old. So my university is 450 years almost. So this is a rather conservative institution. Otherwise, you don't become 450. But if you really want to change, and change is necessary at this moment, I think we all agree here. And we do have to do it in a just way. So we have to bring in all the disciplines. If you really want to change your universities, you can do it from the top. Yes, important that the government supports this. Yes, important that the deans and the presidents and the vice chancellors support this, but that's not enough. You really have to empower your students and your young researchers and give them a say in what they want for the future of their institution. And then you really can make significant changes.
Thank you very much, Professor Wim, and that's fun for the students. That's great. And you know, when you're an aspiring student, you talk to the current students or alumni, and to hear that they have this voice, and for in the context of climate, it's really about intergenerational equity, right? It will actually impact the students, the next generation more. So for them to have a say, we have that sort of, you know, many of us have that traditional mindset that we teach, you know, they're there to learn, but we have a lot to learn from them as well, and respond to them. And of course, you know, the institutional sort of the operational side of university, you have to listen to that demand. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so we have a bonus for this panel session. Usually we would look at the key threads, but we have our keynote speaker, Professor Kelly Gallagher, who has kindly stayed online. I hope you're still there. It is past 10 p.m. In Boston. Hi, Kelly, you're there. Thank you so much. So if we can request Kelly to pick on maybe 2 or 3 sort of key points that you picked up in particular, and elaborate and share your thoughts on those.
Yeah, I think there's 2 things I wanted to bring up that haven't been talked about a lot, though I'll be picking up most recently on Professor Vandendol's comment about the students. But I think that the first one, we haven't talked very much about vocational training. And I think this is super important when we're talking about the just energy transition. Implied in that is how people in a community that have relied on traditional sources of energy, fossil fuels, coal, are going to make a living for themselves. How are they going to fund their schools? How are they going to be able to support their public services if they don't have income, personal income and income for their communities? And so the training to enable people to move into new industries is extremely important. So it's not just preparing the next generation, but preparing the existing generation of workers to make these changes. And then the second point I wanted to bring up really is about the students. And one of the things we've learned at Fletcher is the importance of experiential learning. Students really love to apply their knowledge or put what they're learning into action. And in particular, I think they really want to be problem solvers. And I know that many young people today are feeling so helpless about climate change. And for them to be able to do something concrete and to put what they're learning into practice can be really powerful. It can be empowering for them, but it can also reinforce what we're trying to teach. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. You know, I think an interesting project would be having students work on making their own school more resilient to climate change. So you can imagine this at an elementary level, maybe having students think about which, you know, climate risks they are vulnerable for, and what could they do. One thing they could do, maybe it's filling sandbags and having those prepared and ready for the next storm that they can then, you know, place around the school. Or in a more sophisticated university setting, perhaps it's designing a climate resilient building. And then I think, you know, at a policy school like mine, we often have our students work on a policy memo and practice writing a policy memo. And if they're really good, we encourage them to send those policy memos to decision makers. We've also had students prepare climate finance proposals in support of developing countries. And I think we really want to encourage people to not only take what they're learning, into their brains and maybe into their their hearts, but then to practice putting it into action. And I think that's a very powerful educational approach. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly, and the important point on vocational training and TVET, and focusing on the current generation and shifting that labor force. Actually, your main host here, Ms. Ayako Inagaki, who's a senior director for human social development. We worked together on this back in 2 years ago, Southeast Asia, because in ADB, we have a strong TVET program in several countries across the ASEAN, and I was actually in charge of energy transition. So we brought those together, but it's critically important so that they can support and feel the opportunity in the new economy rather than really stick to what they're doing, because we have to move away from vested interests, right? If they see the opportunity to move, then that creates that momentum. Yeah, so thank you, Kelly. Students' experiential training, super important, and that comes back to Ms. Yorozu's point for the UNESCO and UN program of communities and going outside of that. I love your proposal or approach on policy memos that could be useful for the faculty as well, and making their schools resilient. Okay, so we have a good 15 minutes, which we planned thanks to this fantastic, concise panel, to the point panel. And we have on the screen a ranking. So people ask questions and there's a voting system. So you're getting used to this system. That's great. So the top one, I think you can see this. Good number of people of this world realize danger of climate change. Maybe I don't need to read out. So who would like to answer this one about the politicians, business tycoon? Oh, Christina, yes, please.
Thank you. I don't want to presume to have an answer for addressing powerful politicians and business tycoons, but I do have an example. And this came from our work, especially in the Appalachian region of the United States. This area of the US is on the eastern side. It's in the mountains, and it has been historically dominated by the coal and gas industry, primarily coal. And the region has suffered tremendously. This area has lower educational rates. It has very heightened rates of cancer and health problems, and so on. And primarily because of the predominance of the oil and gas industry. And what these communities in the Appalachian region has really done, and this is partly, returns to one of the questions about technical education, is that historically the technical education schools in the region have catered to industries. They have, tried to form partnerships where students who get trained can immediately have jobs in those industries because they're the dominant industries. But in the United States, there's a growing awareness that industry doesn't oftentimes have the health and well-being of communities in mind. They have their bottom line in mind, and especially of these extractive industries and these, very large, sort of the business tycoon sort of situation. And so what these communities have instead begun to do is really begin to turn to community needs. And this goes back to the Green Education Partnership's fourth pillar, and with regards to communities, it goes back to a point that I was making around communities as well, and really beginning to draw on what are the community's just transition needs? What are the community's cultural assets? What are the community's resources for resilience? And how do we, begin to lean on those to define our technical training needs rather than leaning on extractive industries and those interests of, the business tycoons and so on. And this is really hard for institutions, for technical vocational institutions, for community colleges in the United States, because oftentimes they get funding to run programs from these industries. And so they become a very stronghold in the decision makers' minds in institutions when it comes to where are we going to have funding to pay our faculty? Where are we going to have funding, to run the institution? And again, so there's the need to then turn to alternative visions of what a just transition is, of what a just, green, fair future is. And that's really turning to a whole host of other kinds of training opportunities that is driven from the community needs around just transition. So my attempt to answer that without really talking about business.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Christina, and your focus was really on the communities and those that are who are impacted. Maybe Kelly, if I don't mind putting you on the spot, because you've actually been looking at this political economy and industry sort of transformation. There are a couple of good examples in Michigan or even Canada or West Virginia. But also you work a lot in the developing country space in Asia, for example, China. So if you can talk about these sort of business core interests and how policy can come in to start shifting their mindsets.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, the first point I want to make is I don't think it's easy, and it's certainly not automatic, right? That people are going to notice opportunity and jump for it. We certainly know we need entrepreneurs, and we know that a lot of the change that we seek is not going to happen from the existing industries, what we call the incumbents. The incumbents tend to resist change, to try to protect their existing businesses and their existing business models. So if we look, for example, at where did the electric vehicle industry come from? It wasn't really the big existing industries for the most part. It was these entrepreneurs who kind of came from the side, whether we're thinking of like a BYD in China or a Tesla in the United States. But policy can have a really important catalyzing role by disincentivizing, businesses that are harming the climate, and by incentivizing businesses that can help. And that was the example I was trying to bring to the fore with my discussion of the Inflation Reduction Act, because I think it's so interesting. We really have a very clear-cut example of the US had lost a lot of manufacturing, had lost a lot of the clean energy industries, even though the United States had been at the forefront of a lot of those inventions. The solar industry is a great example. A lot of the solar PV technical research originated in the United States. And we're seeing a very quick response from the private sector in response to these incentives. So that, for me, is kind of heartening to see that it is possible to change, and it's possible to change quickly. But it does require quite a decisive government intervention, and especially because of the imperative for us to act both on the mitigation and on the adaptation side. We don't really have time to just sort of wait for these entrepreneurs to just materialize. But I think we do need to set up the proper incentive structures to shape the market so that they work as productively as possible.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kelly. And you pointed on the incentives and the opportunities. So that's a great thing that we're seeing now. And going back to Kelly's keynote, it's not just the risks, but there are huge opportunities. If we're talking about business tycoons, well, they will say, show me the money. And if the money opportunity is there, right? Opportunities. And if the skills are there, then they will jump on that. So a lot of it is happening. I'm sure our team can share experience and the panel, but let's go to the next popular one. So I think this is about how do we incorporate climate change in technical education. I will go to maybe Dean Quinn and also Dean van der Noel.
Thank you. I'm happy to answer this one, mainly because we are working with the regional and Indigenous people in Western Australia right now to understand how to upskill them and to provide pathways for them to, gain an education in this area. So there's a lot of interest regionally, and we're looking at different models of education to do that. So one of the models that I will be driving personally early next year is flying to regional sites and delivering some of our modules in a way that enables them to work on a project which is local and to actually understand what the green economy and, moving towards net zero means in a local context. So I think that, in education, we call this project-based learning. But it's really about the students in those, I call them students, but they could be workers, technical workers, electricians, tradespeople, for example. But we are actually trying to meet them where they're at, and actually understand what are the challenges they face and give them that system thinking perspective to be able to come up with their own answers. And then that conversation, I think teaching and learning in any area is just about a two-way conversation. We get feedback and understand what is their real challenge, and then we help them to address it. So that would be the way we would approach it.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's a iterative sort of conversational and joint process to develop that. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes,
Professor Fletcher, yeah.
just to add, I think as universities, because I'm from the university perspective, I think you also have to be aware that you have to work together globally. So you need your global partners, and that's what we also do as Dutch universities. To have, we have a global fund, so to have kind of seed money funds for initiatives to work together with global partners, and this has to be done, of course, in a very smart way. It has to be done in co-creation. So it has really to be done together with partners from the global south. Actually, right now we are doing that in Surabaya, which we are working on the Brantas River. It's more a biodiversity project with the local university Erlanga over there and the local government of the province of East Java. So we are there really to design both a new research project and also perhaps a minor, which we will do in Indonesia together with Indonesian students. Really, so this is in a way a practical way to do it. I mean, as a university, you are just as big as you are, so you can't change the whole world. But this is how you create your partnerships and create through co-creation. I think that's very important. New programs, both in research and education, and you really have to do it, on the ground. I think that's why it would be my advice.
Thank you very much. So that's where you're going right after this, right after Manila, and you've been going since 1992. You mentioned. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that experience in developing Asia and then in the local context. Ms. Rika Yorozu, would you like to comment on this one?
Yes, sure. I was thinking, like, for the TVET, greening TVET, it really has to also start from within the system to making TVET opportunities flexible, breaking down like 1 or 2 year courses into microcredits so that people don't have to be away from their work or to learn new skills for greening economies. Yeah, I think that's my main point I want to make.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much for that. And while we have you on the screen, perhaps going to the next popular question. And this is a tricky one, but we can focus on the context of education. The one with 8 votes. Yeah, that one. Yeah. Okay. So this is the understanding or the notion or the thinking that going to green economies is much more costlier than normal development. So how can developed countries help developing countries on that? What are the incentives? So I mean, this is broader than education, but perhaps we can blend in both aspects. Ms. Yorozu, would you like to comment on this one as well?
Immediate answer would be like, perhaps the cost for transition might be expensive, but the associated opportunity cost for not transitioning is much more costly. I think that's the key point that we would need to make to the developed or countries or those developed partners that will be assisting the developing countries to transition the economies. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, that's a really critical point that because of the nature of climate change, if you don't build this into the education system now and the economy, any development benefit may be short-lived and it may reverse its course. So to make development truly sustainable, you really have to build these in, and the many opportunities. So the lost opportunities and then the genuine opportunities from jobs and growth. Anybody from our panel? No? Okay. Yes, please.
I'd like to answer this because it's a personal thing for me. I was born and grew up in a third world economy, and I've spent the last 30 years in Australia. So I see both sides and both aspects. I think, I've always said where there is poverty, or where there is lack of options, people are always going to default to what's the most comfortable and easy route. So I think this is really about a global agenda, perhaps driven by the UN SDGs, which I think many of the developing world is embracing and actually helping people see outside their own countries, right? So I know in Australia, the understanding of what it means to transition to net zero and the UN driver for implementing the Sustainable Development Goals is something that we're educating our generation to be able to do. And I think that will drive the conversations more globally, because that's something that many of the richer nations are now understanding, that it costs more for a third world country to achieve the same target. And how are we going to help support them? But yeah, that's my perspective.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you very much for sharing that. And I think you touched on this, but there are many co-benefits as well, right? For example, energy security. I think actually going for green is also using more indigenous resources that are available and shielding your economy from these crazy energy price fluctuations, right? So there are many of those co-benefits you can pursue. We've quickly run out of time. Thank you for all the questions. The next one, fourth most popular, was about the UNESCO-led greening education partnership, but I'm sure there's a lot on the website, and Ms. Rika Yorozu can help a response to that offline, hopefully, Ms. Rika. So just to wrap up, if we can just go to each of the panelists, just very briefly, as a starter, one key point that the takeaway message for the audience to start this sort of greening process. Maybe we'll start with Ms. Yorozu.
Yeah. Okay, then I would like to invite the Asian Development Bank to be the first bank to join the Greening Education Partnership, together with the universities, the officials present in this forum. You're all welcome to join the partnership. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Ayako is giving me a okay sign. So that's an immediate response to that. Okay, Christina?
Sure. I think as a number one entry point, I think, again, it's how do we close green learning opportunity gaps and do that in a way that really centers community just transition needs and those who have been historically marginalized. So that's
Thank you. Very clear. So important. Thank you very much. Dean Quinn?
Thank you. For me, I think I'd like to emphasize the need to listen to the scientists and engineers, the science behind why we do what we do, but also the flip side, which is the enabling of the understanding of what that means in a social context and public policy context. So I think having those close conversations is vitally important if we're going to do the right thing and make it sustainable.
Thank you. We can put that in a quote and share also amongst our ADB colleagues as well. It's very powerful. Yes,
Yes,
Professor Anadol.
I mean, interdisciplinary education is necessary. It's vital. So you have to bring together the social sciences, the humanities, the engineering, and the natural sciences to have this interdisciplinary approach to our challenges. But if you want to change that, if you want to change universities, please empower your students and your young researchers. Then it works.
Thank you so much. Okay, so if we can please go to Kelly, Professor Kelly Sims Gallagher. If you can do the honor of wrapping this session up with your one key message for this audience, please.
Yeah, I think I would like to leave people with the encouragement to experiment. We are entering into uncharted territory in many respects. Climate change is something we have never experienced together as a society. And I think that means we need to experiment with lots of different approaches at different levels, in different formats. And so I want to encourage people to be brave and to embark on these experiments, learning from the students, learning from each other, and sharing what you've learned.
You can hear the claps here. Kelly, thank you so much. Empowering and being brave. So thank you to everyone. And thanks to this panel, I think that has really set you up for the rest of the day to deep diver and discuss and share your thoughts and come up with action on this. So another round of applause to this excellent panel, please. Thank you. Thank you. And I will hand back to Jost.
Thank you very much, To Kubu, for excellently moderating the session.